Hi, I'm Chef Ange and welcome to my kitchen. If you like this video or any of my other videos, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. On this episode, I'm going to show you how to make a delicious vegetable side dish, which is a roasted garlic Parmesan cauliflower. We eat this a lot in my house. We eat this almost every week. It's a great side dish for any meat or fish, and it's super easy to make. Let's take a look at what ingredients and what equipment that we'll need today. So we're gonna need about 2 heads of these medium-sized cauliflowers. If they were smaller, I might wanna do 3. If it were larger, we could probably get away with 1. This is just a couple sprigs of some Italian parsley. For spices, in here we have 1 teaspoon of garlic powder, 1 teaspoon of onion powder, a half a teaspoon of Italian seasoning, and a half a teaspoon of kosher salt. In here, we're going to add this much later in the recipe. This is about a tablespoon of Pecorino Romano. You can use Parmesan cheese or any hard cheese that's finely grated. We're going to use a couple cloves of garlic. We won't use the whole head. Probably about like 3 or 4 cloves of this of these big cloves of garlic. We're also going to need some olive oil that I have in my wine bottle and a pour spout. And we're going to be garnishing with a little white wine vinegar and some black pepper. This dish is not going to need much equipment. I got my big cooking utility bowl here, a 4-inch paring knife, my chef's knife to chop the parsley, and here I have a baking sheet that's just lined with some parchment paper to save on cleanup. Our first step to cooking this dish is to do our prep work. We need to get the cauliflower in the oven, and then we'll continue some of the other prep work. When I'm cooking, I always start by taking one of these plastic shopping bags and just rolling the edges and just keeping this aside. This helps me keep a garbage station on the counter while I'm cooking, and it's a great way to reuse these plastic bags instead of just throwing them in the trash. So I'm going to keep this right next to me, and as I'm cleaning, I'm going to take my scraps and I'll throw them in there just so I don't have to keep going to the garbage can. So to clean up these heads of cauliflower, I'm going to turn it upside down, and I'm going to take my 4-inch paring knife and I'm going to cut all the way around and cut these leaves and this core off. So I'm going to insert into the cauliflower, point it towards the center, and I'm going to move this around in a circle. As I do that and I cut into the core, you can see the leaves are just falling right off. And as I'm doing that, I'm also removing the core of the cauliflower. So now I'm going to take these leaves and we're going to throw them in our scrap bag, and then we'll continue working the head of the cauliflower and keep snapping off these leaves and get as many of them off as possible by hand before we have to continue to use our paring knife to cut the core out of the cauliflower. Okay, so now that the cauliflower head has been cleaned of the leaves and most of the core, I'm going to take my paring knife and I'm going to cut really close to these florets and get most of the florets off. I want to make sure that the florets are really, really small. So if they're really small, they'll cook fast, they'll get a nice crisp on them. And what I'll do is I'll just move the head of the cauliflower around and just try to cut right into these florets as close as possible to the floret, getting a little bit of the stem. Before I take them and put them inside my bowl, I'll break up as many as I can, trying to keep the floret size pretty small. So even in this big one, just like this, I can break this up into smaller florets. Now that the 2 heads of cauliflower are clean and the florets are in the bowl, I'll go through them just to make sure that there's nothing that's super big. Like this one's a little big, so I'll just take it and I'll break it in half. And I always want to make sure that there's just no bigger chunks because they won't cook as fast as the other ones, and you don't want to have any raw cauliflower next with the nice crisp pieces. So these are all about small enough. I don't see any more really, really big ones. So this is about good enough that we can season it and we can get this into the oven. I've already preheated my oven at 385 degrees. So while I'm doing this, my oven's heating up so I can get this in there and then continue the rest of the prep work. I'm gonna take my olive oil and I'm going to give this a liberal coating of olive oil. I'm gonna make sure that I spread it all around. Probably putting about 2 tablespoons in there. And now we're gonna take our spices. So that's our onion powder, garlic powder, salt and Italian seasoning. And we're gonna sprinkle this right over the top. Sometimes our hands are the best tools that we can use in the kitchen. So I'm gonna give this a nice mix with my hands and make sure that the oil and the spices are coated on every single piece and there's not a lot of dry or unseasoned pieces. So I'll keep moving all the florets around in the bowl. As I move them, the spices mix up, the oil coats all the pieces. So when we get this into the oven, this is also another opportunity for me to see, like, are there any big florets that I would need to break up before this goes in the oven. This all looks really, really good. So now I'm gonna dump my bowl of cauliflower on my baking sheet that's lined with my parchment paper. I wanna spread this out as evenly as I can and put as much space in between as possible. Make sure there's no piles of cauliflower. And what I'm also gonna do is I'm gonna try to turn as many of the florets up as I can so that the stem is down and the cauliflower part is on the top. So just like a puzzle, we'll just go around the sheet and we'll keep adjusting till we can get as many facing up as possible. Now we're gonna take this and put this in our 385-degree oven for about 20 minutes. The 2 things that I'm gonna have to prep are a few of these cloves of garlic and our parsley. So I'm gonna take 4 cloves of garlic. Actually, let's make that 5. These are pretty big and I like extra garlic. So my method for cleaning garlic is to take the clove of garlic and you want to grab the sides of it, so not the flat part but like the long sides, and I'm going to squeeze those 2 sides together. You're going to hear a little pop, and then I take the garlic in my hand and I'll roll it and rub it, and then the skin will flake right off. So now to clean the garlic, we'll clip off the top end of the garlic, leaving the rest of the clove. And again, always getting rid of these as soon as possible. If you don't get rid of them, they might mix in with your garlic. So now from here, we're going to take our garlic. We're going to take our side of our knife, firm pressure with our fingers down on the cutting board, and we're going to smash the clove. So now that the clove is smashed, we'll push that aside and we'll keep repeating for all of our garlic cloves, giving it this little smash. Now that they're all smashed, we'll give them a rough chop. So first, I'll just go through very lightly and see if I can get all the big pieces down to smaller pieces, and I'm always cutting with my fingertips down and I'm trying to go for all the large pieces. Now from here, I'll clean the side of my knife off, and now we can go through this a little quicker. So the way I like to do this is take the tip of the knife, put it down here, and I'll take my other hand and I'll put my palm with my fingers up just to make sure they get out of the way. And if the knife is always in contact with the board, it's hard for it to slip. And you just keep pushing everything back to the center, clean the knife, push it back to the center, and keep repeating until we get the desired size. So to clean parsley, you always want to use the leaf and not as much of the stem as possible. So I'm just going to grab as close to the leaf as possible. With these 3 fingers, I'm going to go around the stem and I'm going to pull, removing the stem. And I'm just going to keep grabbing one big stem right here and just keep plucking the leaves off with that 3-finger method. And I'll push all my leaves in a pile. So now, just like the garlic, we're going to push everything into a nice tight pile. We're going to put our end of our blade down on the cutting board. We're going to give it just a rough chop just to get a lot of the fluffiness out of it. And now from here we can go through it much faster. And just like a fan blade, I just keep moving and moving. I'll take the bigger pieces, I'll push them towards the center. We'll go through it maybe 2 or 3 times before we get the desired size. And we're using this as a garnish, so we want to get it pretty small. I don't really like large pieces of parsley, like a parsley salad. So whenever we're garnishing with parsley or cilantro or any of these fresh, bright herbs, we want to chop them decently finely and make sure it's as uniform as possible with no big pieces. So the cauliflower's been cooking for about 20 minutes at 385. I just took it out of the oven to add the garlic. While it's out of the oven, I also turned the temperature of the oven up to 400, so now we can get more of a crisp on the outside. So this is the same garlic that I chopped before. I put a little olive oil in there just to coat the garlic, because any garlic that's not going to be coated with olive oil would possibly burn, and just burnt garlic's just not a great flavor. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to use my hand to just sprinkle this right over the pan and cover as much of it as possible. And while I'm covering it, I'm trying to use my fingers to make sure that there's no big clumps of this chopped garlic, and that it's spread out as evenly as possible. And now this is going to go back in the oven for about 15 more minutes at 400 degrees. After that additional 15 minutes at 400, cauliflower's almost cooked. So what we're going to do is we're going to sprinkle our cheese right over the top, trying to spread it out as much as possible. You don't need a lot, and that tablespoon will do. I'm also gonna put some fresh ground black pepper on this now. I try not to put the pepper on too early, as if you put pepper on early, it'll burn. Everything looks good here. And now we're gonna send this in the oven for just 5 more minutes just to get a little cook on that cheese. So after about that 5 minutes, this cauliflower is done cooking. And whenever you're getting times and temperatures on recipes from my channel or from anywhere, those are just estimates. You kind of have to like look at the food and kind of figure out like, is this done or not? So like if I flip over like any of these and I see like this nice browning like on the bottom of these florets, then I know that it's probably pretty good, and I can see a lot of the browning on like the high spots on the top. This looks great. So now we're just gonna do 2 things to finish before we put this in a serving bowl. I'm gonna take some of that parsley that I chopped, and I'm just gonna sprinkle this right over the top here, and this is gonna allow us to mix in really nicely before we put it in our serving bowl. I'm not gonna put too much, just enough to just add a little color and a little bit of that parsley flavor. One thing I'm also going to do too is I'm going to take some white wine vinegar, and I'm going to take the tiniest little bit and drizzle it on the top. So I'm going to put my finger over the top of the bottle, and I'm really just adding a couple of drops. So the cauliflower's cooled down a little bit. I transferred it over to this serving bowl, and now I'm just going to finish up with some garnishes. I mean, you can stop here or you can add a little bit more. So I'll take a little bit more of that cheese and I'll sprinkle it on top. These are some toasted pine nuts. You can use toasted almond slivers, but I happen to have some pine nuts that I just toasted in a dry pan until I got a little bit of brown color on them. So I'll take a couple of these and sprinkle them right over the top. And here's a little bit of that leftover parsley. All done. Time to eat.